Hello and welcome to Industry Today, the podcast powered by MTC Events. Today I am delighted to be joined by Mike Wilson, the MTC's Chief Automation Officer, and someone who is widely recognised as one of the leading authorities on robotics and automation in the UK. Thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Thank you.
So, to kick things off, can you give us a snapshot of where the UK is currently on its automation journey and how does it compare to other manufacturing nations globally?
The UK is unfortunately behind most of our major competitors. In terms of robots, which is the only real form of automation that we can actually count, our robot density, which is the number of robots per 10,000 workers, we are currently 23rd on the league table. Wow. So we're behind all of our major competitors and significantly behind. People expect sectors such as the automotive and electronic sectors to be using large numbers of robots, and yes, they do. So at the top of the table, you see countries like Korea, China, Japan and Germany with significant numbers of robots. The UK, unfortunately, is behind all of our major competitors, including other countries like Denmark, which doesn't have a major automotive or electronic sector. So there's some way to go to catch up with what our competitors are doing.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think the UK is typically slower to adopt these technologies?
I think there are a number of factors that contribute to that. There is no one single issue, but one of the biggest ones is that we typically do not invest in capital equipment at the same rate as some of our leading competing countries. So for example, the All-Party Parliamentary Manufacturing Group produced a report probably about 10 years ago now, looking at the culture and competitiveness of UK manufacturing. And they called the report Making Good. And if I can summarise that report in a couple of sentences, it basically said that in the UK, we're very proud that we keep all of our old machines running, whereas in Germany, they're very proud they bought new ones.
Yeah.
And basically, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues. It's that cultural kind of make, do, amend sort of attitude that's holding back not only robots, but all forms of more advanced technologies.
How interesting. So it's something that as a nation we're very proud of and kind of culturally is embedded in how we are and what we do, but that's a barrier to this particular technology.
It is,
yeah.
and it's holding us back, and it's also resulting in a lack of productivity competitiveness as well. So our productivity is sort of around 20% behind some of our major competitors.
Wow.
And when the Eastern European countries joined the European Union, we were one of the few countries that allowed free movement of labour, and we did bring in significant numbers of Eastern European workers, and they've done a great job. But what it did mean is we didn't invest in the robotic automation, whereas some of the other countries that didn't allow quite the same influx of people have invested, and as a result, the consequence of that is we're now behind what those competing countries are doing.
Do you think we're seeing a shift in mindset in UK manufacturing to be adopting more automation and robotic technology, or do you think people are still hesitant to do it?
I think that they're still hesitant, but we are starting to see a change. So I think people are concerned about the costs, they're concerned about the risk, but there are other factors that are now starting to change that. So we do have issues in terms of labour availability. So a lot of, since we've had Brexit, since the pandemic, we've had significant outflows, if you like, from our workforce. So there is a labour shortage currently, and we're not going to address it through any other means other than automation.
Yeah.
Things like the more recent increases in national insurance, the living wage, is also having an impact. So it's making businesses look at the potential for using robots within their manufacturing facilities. But I still think there's a little bit of caution there. We haven't seen a step change yet. But no. I kind of feel that if the UK is ever going to change the narrative, if you like, it now is the kind of time that it will.
The kind of broader political landscape is ultimately forcing businesses down a certain route, and actually they're going to have to look at other solutions and ways in which they can remain competitive and compete against the other nations as well, like you say.
Exactly that. But I also think, given the global uncertainties that we're facing, with tariffs that they're imposing from the US, issues like the war in Ukraine, all of those things are starting to make businesses look at bringing manufacturing back into the UK, or at least into Europe. And I think it's important. We want that manufacturing to be in the UK rather than necessarily based on mainland Europe somewhere. So we do want it here, but to achieve that, we need to make sure it's competitive. And to be competitive, we have to use greater levels of automation. As we already mentioned, there's labour shortages anyway, so you can't just build new factories and expect to hire hundreds of people. So we need to make sure that we can use much more automation to enable the, if you like, the re-energising of UK manufacturing, to rebuild that sector. And I think that's important for two reasons, really. Firstly, I personally believe that we have to make things and sell them to generate the money, if you like, that then pays for our health service and fixing the holes in the road and all those kind of things. But also, I think fundamentally, you need a strong manufacturing sector to provide the basis for the UK economy and to deliver the growth that we need. And there's more opportunity to achieve that within manufacturing than there is in many other places.
And you've talked about labour and the workforce. How important is workforce upskilling to support businesses in implementing automation and robotics? And are there any particular roles that you think companies need to be focusing on?
Certainly in terms of the implementation and the use of robot automation, obviously it does require some slightly different skills. It's probably not as difficult as many businesses perceive, because the technology has become much easier to use and apply than it has been previously. But there is a need for upskilling, and we recently conducted a workforce foresighting cycle exercise looking at the skills required by SMEs, and part of that was the skills to operate and maintain the equipment. But probably one of the biggest gaps that we found was the actual skills to procure the equipment. So this is about identifying what the right applications might be, building the business case and writing the specification so you can go to the supply chain and get people to provide proposals for what's needed. And we found that those are kind of skills that really aren't being taught in any kind of appropriate apprentice or degree type programs. And particularly within the SME community, they don't have those kind of skills. And that's one of the barriers, if you like, is they're uncertain to go to the market because they don't really know what it is they're asking for, and they don't know how to go about it. So that's certainly an area where we need to try and help those businesses as they start to look at this. And we certainly know that the first purchase, the first installation is always the most difficult. And businesses that have done it once then do move on to do more. But it's helping them do that first one is where we need to provide some support.
It's giving them the confidence, isn't it, to kind of take that leap. And you mentioned earlier around, I guess, potentially one of the misconceptions is that this is hugely expensive to do, and it's going to, cost so much money that companies can't quite work it out in their head as to which route they go down and how do they even do that and which path do they choose. And actually, you're saying that isn't always the case. That there are technologies available out there that are much more accessible to businesses, particularly in manufacturing.
No, definitely. I mean, as an example, if you had a machine tool that's being loaded and unloaded manually, you're probably operating that machine tool at 60-70% kind of utilization. Whereas if you automate it, you put a robot on there to load and unload, you can get that up to 90% plus. So you can get much more out of your existing investment in that machine tool. But that robot to perform that automated load and unload could probably be bought for less than £50,000.
Right.
So it's, I mean, I'm not saying that's a small sum of money, but it's not a ridiculous sum of money. And a lot of people perceive that kind of thing would be costing them £200,000 or £300,000. So it's helping them understand that there are often tasks within the facility that can be automated for relatively inexpensive sums. And when you consider the cost of the operators these days, you're probably paying them over a 2-year period certainly more than that £50,000. And really you want to be getting more value out of those employees by using them on tasks where they're adding value to the product rather than just picking things up and moving them around.
And that makes them feel more valued and that their skills are being recognised and they're adding that to that business. So do you think that's one of the things that you come up against most with, particularly with SMEs, that they are nervous that it's too expensive or complex for them to implement? And how do you help them with that? How do you help them with that education piece?
It's certainly one of the barriers. They do feel it's too expensive or they don't have the skills, and we do that by showing them, if you like. We have a number of case studies that we've got where businesses that we've worked with who have implemented robot systems very successfully. One of my favourite stories at the moment is a company called Walsall Wheelbarrow, who make wheelbarrows in the UK, in the Black Country, and many people don't even think that we make wheelbarrows in the UK anymore. It's kind of something we buy in.
Yeah.
But no, this is a family-owned business, and they've been making wheelbarrows for a number of years, very successfully, and they've got 20 robots on their shop floor as well as 20 workers. And they've very successfully automated a whole range of processes, and it's enabled them to be competitive, to be more successful, and it also enables them to flex their production volumes. So during the pandemic, they were able to significantly increase the volume of wheelbarrows they were producing by operating the automation overnight without people in the factory to satisfy the demand that was out there at the time. So the pandemic, actually, they did very nicely out of that. And it just kind of illustrates that even a company that is making wheelbarrows, and I say that, but they're not what you'd traditionally expect, a high-tech business that might use robots. This is a traditional Black Country metal bashing business, and I kind of like them, because if they can do it, then there are an awful lot of SMEs out there that could do similar things.
Yeah, what a great example. Really lovely. So are there any specific sectors that you think are driving the growth of robotics and automation? And where do you see the strongest opportunities?
Automotive and the supply chain to the automotive has been the biggest user of robots in the UK. The biggest opportunity actually is within SMEs in general, including things like the food manufacturing sector, general engineering, medical devices and so on, all sorts of relatively small businesses that are operating in these sectors. And there's probably something of the order of about 30,000 businesses in the UK that employ between 10 and 250 employees, so traditional SME manufacturing businesses. And they're probably the biggest target. Those are the ones that we really ought to try and find ways to help. And as a best guess, there's probably less than a quarter of those have got at least one robot. So there's significant potential there. And it's across a whole range of industry sectors, but there are certain applications like machine tending that I mentioned, or palletizing, that are very proven, there are many solutions that are commercially available. So there's solutions out there that people can buy, proven, tested technologies that can be implemented within these kind of businesses.
So whilst the SMEs pose a big opportunity, do you think that they're up against some of the biggest challenges and barriers to implementing robotics and automation?
They probably have more barriers than, let's say, the larger enterprises, purely because of the resources that they have. They've obviously got less resources. The issue in terms of their skill sets, the ability to procure the equipment, is definitely a barrier. But the other one is also access to finance. And the banks, tell people like me that they're very happy to support the business case for the purchase of robot automation solutions. But I think one of the challenges, a lot of these businesses, again, don't have the skill set to develop a decent business case, and they need a little bit of help with that. It's not rocket science, it's not difficult, but if you've never done it, then you don't know how to do it. And I think those are areas where we can help them, is developing that business case so they can provide a justification to the banks, to the finance houses, to get the money that's required to enable them to make the investment.
So what support is available out there for businesses, both on a kind of regional level and a national level?
Well, Made Smarter is a programme that the government's implemented and is expanding, and that is providing some support related to robot adoption. It's really targeted at digital technologies rather than specifically robots, but there are a few businesses that have been through that journey and have implemented robots as a consequence of that support. We as the MTC and other members of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult do provide advice and support to businesses. We're also setting up what we're calling the West Midlands Robotics Autonomous Systems Cluster.
Okay.
And that's one of the objectives of that group, is to help West Midlands businesses more in terms of being aware of what the technology is and how it can help them and how we can support them. And the reason we're doing that on a West Midlands basis is it's much easier to focus on your local region. And we're hoping that we can set up a model in the West Midlands that will help the West Midlands, but at the same time we'll prove that it works, and then it can be replicated in other parts of the country.
So you're creating a blueprint essentially for other regions, other areas to mirror what you're doing and hopefully be able to support those companies. Yeah,
exactly that. Yes. Yeah.
One thing I know that you're very central to is the upcoming MTC event, Robotics and Automation, taking place in June, which goes into a lot of depth and detail about the stuff we're talking about today. Can you just provide an overview of that event, who's it for, and why is it so important to this subject matter in particular?
The Robotics and Automation Conference event that this will be the fourth year that we've run it. So it's not been around a long time, but it's been growing every year. We had something like 400 people come along to the event last year, and we're hoping to get more this year. It's a combination of a conference together with some exhibitions, and we're really aiming it at a whole range of people that have an interest in robotics. So we do invite the academics and the startups, but we also invite the robot vendors and the systems integrators as well as end users. And the end users are one of the particular keys in all of this. So this year we've got a focus on day one about adoption for end users. Sessions specifically aimed at the SMEs, but also the larger enterprises. And we've got people coming along to talk about their experiences and the lessons they've learned, including Walsall Wheelbarrows, my example earlier, and also a number of businesses that are there or organisations that are there to help provide the support that's needed. So that's the focus on day one, is to show people what the opportunities are and how they can get help, and taking them through that journey so they know how to, if you like, minimise the risk, and they're not as concerned about making those first steps into robot automation.
Yeah.
Day two is more aimed at the technology, more aimed at the academics and the startups. And we're looking at where is the technology going, what's the future hold, and we're looking at things like AI, humanoid robots, and what the implications of those might be, and also how the MTC and other organisations can help take university research through into development so that it can then be applied in industry as well, into some of the newer sectors like nuclear energy and such like. So it's about day two is much more about the technology and what the future might look like. And the reason we promote this event, the reason we organise this event, is it is the only one in the UK where we get all of those people from the community together in one place at one time. It's about building networks, building connections. It's not just an exhibition, it's not just a conference, it's a bit of both. And as I said, we're trying to cover the whole sector, so that the whole community, so that we get everybody at least talking to each other and building those links that's going to help the UK robotics sector to thrive in the future.
And there's so much to be said for that, for collaborating, for coming together, for sharing your pains with other people and other businesses. And, they'll have businesses in one room that are, direct competitors, but actually they recognise the benefits of talking and discussing, particularly when this is such an important part of business moving forwards. People need to be doing this. They need to be on their automation journey at some point. So, but as we spoke about earlier, people need the confidence to do that, don't they? And hopefully it sounds like that's what the event will start to get people thinking about.
And a lot of that is about having the leaders, if you like, with the vision to drive it forward within their own businesses.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something that I've found with all particularly the smaller businesses that have undertaken automation. It's often been initiated by the MD or the owner of the business that's kind of gone, this is the right thing for us, and put the effort in and provided the direction to make it happen within their own businesses.
Yeah.
And we want to spread more of that confidence, if you like, so that people realise that things like robots are not just for the automotive industry, they're also equally applicable to any business within the UK.
Perfect. What excites you most about where robotics is heading, particularly for manufacturing in the UK?
That's a good question. I mean, I've been doing robots for 40 years, which is a little bit scary, but over that time, it's always been interesting for me. You know, I've been involved in some of the early days, if you like, of robot implementation, and I think the bit that excites me is where we are in the UK today. Is I think we stand have a great opportunity to re-energise our manufacturing sector, to really boost what we do. And I think things like we've seen happen with the British Steel saga at Scunthorpe in the recent times, that just illustrates how important manufacturing is to the UK economy. And I think what we will see is businesses will start to realise that robot automation has to be part of their story. They really do need to be implementing these kind of solutions. And therefore, I do expect to see significant acceleration in terms of robot adoption over the next few years within UK manufacturing. So it's an exciting time to be involved, for sure.
And if you could give manufacturers that are considering this, they might be at the very, very start of it, they might not have even thought about it until they've listened to this conversation today, one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think that would be is to ring people like me, somebody like me, it doesn't have to be me, but somebody like me, get somebody to come along, preferably independent, but has some knowledge of robot automation, get them to come along, have a walk around the factory and have a look and just point out where you could successfully put in some robots and then pick a relatively simple application and take it from there. But get started fundamentally. That's the message, is you need to start.
And they're not on their own, like you say. There's support out there, there's people out there, there's organisations out there that are the experts, and they're there to help.
Definitely.
Perfect. I think that was a really great place to round off the conversation. We could talk about this with you in particular for hours, Mike. So if you want to learn more and also want to be part of the conversation, obviously we've talked about the Robotics and Automation event that is taking place at the MTC on the 17th and 18th of June. For more information, head to mtcevents.co.uk and click on upcoming events, where you can find out more and register to attend. It's free to attend, but I know you've had lots of interest already and lots of sign-ups, so don't miss out your opportunity to be a part of it. You can also find out more about the MTC's events from the website. Thank you for joining me today, Mike.
Thank you.
For more information about today's podcast and past and upcoming episodes of Industry Today, visit mtcevents.co.uk or search Industry Today wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts. Thank you for joining us.